I mean, it's a super big story, but it's a story that's very synonymous with the whole of the city that happened during the Cold War. It was a city that was divided in two. So you had the Bundesliga remained in its entirety, but then the DDR formed their own league, and that had its own complications with the politics that were synonymous with the region as well. So corruption, and, you know, anything to do with kind of right-wing popularism. And so you had teams that were doing very well, which perhaps shouldn't necessarily have been.
Okay,
and were also owned by, you know, people within the government that had, you know, who had a history of, you know, killing people, violence. There were associations with the Stasi, basically just very ugly scenarios. Yeah.
Wow. So the FIFA for DDR.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a good way of describing it. Yeah.
But those teams were, the teams from East Germany were playing also against the teams from West Germany, or were like two completely leagues playing under?
It was two completely separate leagues.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Union Berlin was the one in the East?
Exactly, yeah. But they weren't even a part of the conversation at the time. I mean, of course they were, because they were a team in Berlin. But back then they weren't even the second biggest team. They were in the third league. They are and always have been like a working man's team. Very poor, very kind of isolated, you know, stuck out in Köpenick, the east of the city, and they weren't even a part of the conversation. Back then, the biggest team in Berlin was BFC Dynamo, a team now that is in the fourth league, you know, kind of very isolated, but they were supported by members of the Stasi, and they were propagated, and, you know, they were given funds and championed as, you know, these kind of one of the biggest teams in the DDR, as like a showcase team, as a prestige to say to the rest of the Europe, to say, hey, look, we have good football too.
Okay. Because they were trying to do that with everything.
Because they were trying to do that with everything, yeah. And then as soon as the wall fell and the support from the DDR came, you saw it was all smoke and mirrors. There was nothing there, and now they're, you know.
And now the Union Berlin is the one who managed to get into the first league.
Exactly. Right? It's a beautiful story of, you know, a team that stuck to their principles, that stuck to their ideologies, that never tried to sell out. I don't know if you've been to the Alta Forestei. I think currently it's 35,000 people. I might be wrong on that. First time I went, it was somewhere in the region half of that. It's always been a team that's been about the fans first, and then everything else secondary.
I mean, if you have never been in the first league and you have hardcore fans who will go there and support you, means like those fans are super fans no matter in which league you're playing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the most important thing. Yeah.
I went once to the Olympiastadion, but it was to watch the Hertha, but it was when it was in the second Liga.
Yeah.
So the tickets I think was like 10 euros. And yeah, it was also fun. We bought the tickets in the hardcore area where the hardcore fans were, and it was like, was interesting, like they're next to the people playing the drums and everything. I was like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
These people support their team no matter which league they're playing. Yeah. So, and that tour is kicking during the EM.
Yeah, it's during the Euros. So far we're selling tickets and putting information on Johnny Whitlam's site. There's probably a link to it in his podcast. But I think it's just Johnny Whitlam or johnnywhitlam.com or something like this.
Yeah. In England, you have a lot of also very famous for hooligans and everything. Also in Berlin, do you still have hooligans or that kind of culture? Or also back then when it was like during the Cold War, was it something like that?
Well, I mean, during the Cold War, not so much, because you had state control was very high. Any kind of people who were seemed antisocial in any way were immediately punished, sent to correction centers, or they would lose their social status, you know. Within this period, the kind of jobs you got were dependent on how the state viewed you. So if you were a hooligan or you're antisocial in any way, then it didn't benefit you in any way to whatever it is that you wanted to do. Hooliganism in Germany, yeah, it exists, but not to the degree that it did exist in the UK. I think, you know, when you ask me about how things are in the UK, like, I haven't lived there for 15 years. And I don't really go back or kind of even view myself so much as a British person anymore, to be honest. But yeah, hooliganism was a thing that, you know, was very predominant, especially within the 80s. Not so much anymore. Things changed within terraced grounds. Prices increased to an extent that it kind of deterred those who were more interested in violence.